Hi, our lesson for today is about the types of speech context. When we say speech context or context, it is refers to the situation or environment involved in a communication. It involves factors such as your relationship with your audience. So there are three speech contexts, namely the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and public communication. Interpersonal communication. This type of communication is characterized by your ability to self talk. Intra means within, so it makes sense that interpersonal communication exists within an individual. Internal communication is a dialogue with yourself. In other words, it is a self talk. Example, you are asking yourself what you want to do on Sunday or what to tell to your mother because you are coming home late. So those are example of intrapersonal communication. Next, interpersonal communication, this could be used internal vocalization or reflective thinking. It is a context where you engage in self-reflections and meditation. Example of these are thinking, remembering, and feeling. Interpersonal communication is a form of thinking out loud or what is called soliloquy in literature. So when we say soliloquy, it is an act of speaking one's thoughts out loud when by oneself or regardless of any hearers, especially by a character in a play. Interpersonal communication may involve different levels of communication activity. We have here the internal discourse, solo vocal communication, and the solo written communication. So, when we say internal discourse, it involves thinking, concentration, and analysis. Psychologists include both daydreaming and nocturnal dreaming is an example of internal discourse. Next, we have here the solo vocal communication. Solo vocal communication is speaking aloud to oneself. So this may be in situations where a person rehearses what he would want to say to another person, or simply to calm himself down when he is angry, or to entertain himself when he is bored. Next one, or the last one, we have here the solo written communication. Solo written communication is writing one's thoughts and observations with no intention of having somebody read what he has written. There are three aspects of interpersonal communication. The first one, we have here the self concept. Self concept focuses internally. Self concept is the basis for interpersonal communication because it determines how a person sees himself or herself, and it is oriented toward others. Self concept, also called self awareness, it involves three factors: the belief, the values, and the attitudes. Next, we have here the perception. Perception looks outward. So perception of the outside world also is rooted on the belief, values, and attitude. It is closely intertwined with self-concept that one feeds off the other. So it is creating a harmonious understanding of both oneself and one's world. Next one, or the last one, we have here the expectations. Expectations are future-oriented message dealing with a long-term roles, sometimes called life scripts. These are projected of learned relationships within the family or within the society. Another type of the speech context, we have here the interpersonal communication. So when we say interpersonal communication, this context involves an interchange of message or ideas between or among people. This is the most common type of communication. We do this when we want to convey a message to another person. Also, verbal and nonverbal communications are used in this type of communication. Here are the principles of interpersonal communication. The first one, interpersonal communication is inevitable and irreversible. Interpersonal communication is inevitable because it is necessary for human survival. It is irreversible because you cannot take back whatever you have said. Next, interpersonal communication is influenced, affected by culture and power. So different culture express themselves differently, verbally or non-verbally. You communicate differently with different people. You talk more formally with your teachers and parents than with your friends, right? Next one, interpersonal communication changes with technology. Before, we had only the radio, telegram, television, and telephone. Today, we have cell phones, instant messaging, chatting, emailing, Facebook, and many more. And the last one, interpersonal communication involves rules. So these are the guidelines and expectations control our manner of communication. The interpersonal communication is divided into two groups, the dyadic and the small group communication. So the first one we have here, the dyadic communication. It involves two people sharing mutual ideas, thoughts, likes, and dislikes. So these are the two persons engaged in communication and share ideas, information, message, belief, and feelings. Next one, according to Wilmot, 1975 notes that a dyad cannot be subdivided, meaning when a dyad is formed, a complete social unit exists. So the dyad is the nucleus upon which contains elements that form the basis of all relationship. So the loss of one person from dyad eliminates the dyad. Without both parties, the dyad does not exist. Next is the small group communication. So when we say small group, it involves three or more person. This requires a face-to-face discussion with an objective to accomplish. Small group communication, this is an interchange of information or ideas among three or more person. Small group communication differs with dyadic communication in terms of number of person involved. Its main objective is to arrive at a consensus among the members or to provide an agreed solution to a problem raised. Next one. But here, as more as people are added and the number increase, the interaction becomes more difficult because the participants cannot talk freely. So, the literal definition of group discussion is obvious: a critical conversation about particular topic or perhaps a range of topic conducted in a group of a size that allow participation to all members. A group of three generally doesn't need a leader to have a good discussion, but once the number reaches 5 or 6, a leader or facilitator can often be helpful in ensuring an effective communication. Example of small group communication are team planning, discussion, brainstorming, and many more. Characteristics of interpersonal communication. It involves two or more people. Interpersonal communication occurs between two people or two participants who may be part of a group. You have learned that in this process, people involved in this type exchange of ideas, informations, and feelings. Next one, it is continuous. When a person is with someone, even though they are not talking, communication continues because messages can still be sent through nonverbal signals. For example, you attend a party and you introduce to another guest. You start exchanging idea for a few minutes, then there is a lull or a pause moment. Would you be able to tell if that person is still interested in talking to you? Or would be able to observe that in his or her nonverbal cues, your next move will depend on your observation, right? So that is because even without verbal signal, communication continues. Next one, it need not face to face. So, interpersonal communication may not always be a face to face encounter. It may be talking to someone on the telephone or cell phone, communicating via Viber, reading an email, having Facebook messages, and many more. In short, this type of communication can be mediated or aided by technology. Next one, it is transactional. Interpersonal communication is transactional because each person involved in the process gains something. It can be a knowledge, experience, and so on. Next one, it is irreversible. What has transpired during the communication process cannot be taken back or ignored. For example, in a meeting, a heated argument ensued between participants and they lost control of the situation. They may feel remorse after and apologize to each other and be friends again, but what happened cannot be changed. Next one, it involves verbal and non-verbal cues. Even if communication is verbal or associated with words, non-communication or non-verbal communication is equally as power, if not more powerful at times. So the saying that action speaks louder than voice is incontrovertible because even without words, they can mean a lot. Next one, it is affected by noise. Noise coming from the speaker, the listener, or the environment can disrupt the communication process, and it involves feedback. So, any kind of communication deserves some feedback, whether it is a verbal or nonverbal. No feedback, no communication is truism. A message without any effect or feedback does not serve the purpose of communication. The last type of speech context we have here the public communication. Public communication, also known as public speaking, as communication between a speaker and a group of people called the audience in a structured, deliberate manner. Public communication is a process of exchanging messages among individuals or groups of individuals engaged in public dialogue to deliver a message to a particular audience. Public speaking events, newspaper editorials, billboards, advertisements, concerts are some types of public communication. Another example of this is a lecture given by a teacher to his students. Public discussion often takes the form of panel. A panel discussion is a public exchange of ideas, giving experts and audience members the chance to discuss a particular topic. Panel discussion often used into politics, issues affecting communities, and academic topics. To learn more about the public speaking, here are some of its characteristics. It is audience-centered. This means that as a speaker, you should focus on your audience and analyze what they need. A good speaker should see to it that his or her message is understood. Next, it invokes critical thinking. Critical thinking is defined as the process of quantitatively and qualitatively assessing the information people have accumulated and how they use the information to solve problems and new patterns of understanding. In public communication, critical thinking occurs when the audience or the listeners accumulate the ideas imparted to them by the speaker, assess whether the information given is valid, decide what to believe, form their judgment, and apply the new learning. The audience must be highly active listeners so that they can observe, infer, argue, and decide which among the information being given can be accepted and be considered true and valid. Next, it requires ethics. Every speaker is expected to behave ethically. Ethics is defined as a set of moral principles or rules behavior that determines what is right or wrong. As a speaker, you are morally obligated to be ethical, meaning you should be truthful in everything you say. Base your conclusions on clear evidence, recognize your sources, and be ready to show them in case a member of the audience questions your point. More so, show respect for your audience by not being antagonistic, not using insulting words, nor embarrassing any of them. Respect their time too. So the genuineness of your action will show in the tone of your voice, your facial expressions, and your actions. And the last one, it empowers the speaker. Public speaking is empowering because it puts the speaker in a position where he can control the situation. Through public speaking, he is able to develop his ability to think critically and to influence the behavior and attitude of other people. By mastering his public speaking skills, he is able to communicate the information he wants to convey and is able to make his listeners accept, believe, and embrace his arguments. If you have any question about this topic, please comment your name. We will address all your questions during our synchronous classes. If none, kindly click the thumbs up. Thank you.